Alright, welcome back to the first module. So we're going to talk about controlling services and daemons. So during this lab, by the way, there's going to be very few things that are new in these labs. Most of the content, if you already went through all the requirements for your RHCE exam, you're probably familiar with it already. But it's important that we go through it, because as we progress through the rest of the units, then we will need to know or be very familiar with these things, just to to make sure that we can complete all the other tasks. So it's important to cover some of the basics. During this video we will talk about the toolbox. On every video I'm going to start with a toolbox that you can use as a system administrator to complete the tasks that are particular to this content, right? So it's important that you keep in mind this toolbox, because these are going to be really the tool set that you will use later on as a system administrator, or to even take the exam. Then we will talk about daemons and what they are, and we were just gonna talk. We will do a bit of theory, but really not too much. We really want to get into the the practical part of the lab. After that, we'll talk about Systemctl. So we introduce the tool, we show you some comments and how to use it. Then we work with units. So very briefly, we will go through some of the units that we have available and how to query those units and whatnot. And then we're going to start working with services, which is the most important part of the lab, right? Make sure that you can control how your services behave, the persistent state of the services, and how to mask the services as well for those services that you you really don't want enabled. And then we're going to talk about something that I call less important options to work with services. And the reason why I call them less important options is because it's really this is really not a lot of benefit. These are just some options out that we can use in scripting, and but we see it's only two options, but I want to show them to you anyways. And then we're going to start working with targets. We'll talk a bit about what are the most important targets that we have for Red Hat Enterprise 7, and how to switch from one target to the other one, and how to set the persistent target. And also we're gonna show you how the system actually defaults to certain targets depending on certain conditions, right? But we will talk about it. If we have a problem on the system, you will see that it will go to a specific target where you're allowed to troubleshoot. But then I'm going to show you how to manipulate the boot process, how to edit the boot process to booting a different target if you have to, so that way you have more control over without changing the persistent target. You can actually at one time change the target to something else and work with it. And then we're going to go through the password recovery process, right? Password recovery process is very important. In real life, if you go to a client and the client doesn't know the password, then you're going home very early. So let's make sure that we know how to recover the password in case we lose it. So we're going to go step by step and show you how to go through the password recovery process. Okay, so let's talk about a toolkit. I will include as part of my toolkit obviously the system administrator's guide for Red Hat Enterprise 7. So make sure that you keep that link with you. This is a free book that's published on the Red Hat side, and you can use it as your reference guide. The second tool for your toolkit is the Systemctl command, and then obviously the man page for Systemctl. So these are the two main tools that we're going to use through this video. Okay, so let's do something. The Systemctl, we're gonna talk a lot about it, but I wanted to go through the man page for Systemctl just to show you what the content that you can work with, right? So let's do man. All right, so the Systemctl man page really has some information about the options that you have for this command, and you can use it as a reference in case you forget some of the options that we're going to talk about, later on. So the options are listed here. We will be, I'm just going to scroll down to show you. We have, besides the option, we have the unit commands. These ones are also going to be important, so keep in mind that you can look at the unit commands here and you will see what we need them. Here we have the start, what does it mean, the stop, the reload, the restart, and the try restart, the reload or restart. We're not going to talk about all of them, but it's good to know. It's good for you to know where to go if you need additional information. The isolate is an important one as well. And then we have the is active, is failed, the status, and the show, and a few of these directives that we can use with Systemctl. We do have unit file commands like list unit files and enable, etc., disable. Also, these are also important for you to get familiar with. Is enable, and then we have here the is enable outputs, right? But this is one of those commands that I will show you later, but these are not that important. This is just in case you're scripting, you have a binary value here, or you have a value here that you can use programmatically, but you will see that there are other commands that give you a lot more information. So if you're in front of the server, the is enable, you might use it just to get a quick peek, but I never used it. So obviously the mask, the unmask, edit, the get default, these are also two important ones that we're going to use to work with targets, and also the set default command. So you have a lot of information there, right? Okay, so let me get out of there. So this is your toolkit. Make sure that you're familiar with it. I've always said that an administrator that tries to remember everything he needs to do is really very limited to how much he can memorize at one time, right? So a good system administrator or a good system engineer will really have a toolkit with all the tools that he needs, and the better his toolkit, the better he is. All right, so just keep in mind these ones. I will give you additional resources as we go through the rest of the videos, but let's start with these ones for this video. All right, so let's just quickly bring about a little bit of theory. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on the theories because you're already familiar with this, but it's worth talking about this in case, so to give you some context as we move forward, right? So the first question is, what is a daemon? Right? A daemon is basically just a process that runs in the background and performs a particular operation, right? So every executable that you run on Linux or any operating system for that matter, we create or an agent or a process that's going to be on the background receiving directives, right, or performing a particular task. The service, which is not that all different from a daemon, is really an application that's constantly running on the background. So the service really doesn't have a lot of interaction with the user, which is the main difference. But it's running on the background, and it's also performing tasks, right? Good examples are, for example, your web services, right? You have a web server. The web server will run a web service, right? The web service will take care of different attributes, just to guard your web server and to make sure that your web server is available, right? It's going to make sure that it has a socket that's listening on a particular port. Then whenever it gets a request, it passes the request to the right place and interprets the request, right? And the next one is targets, right? Targets are a replacement from, if you're familiar with previous versions of Red Hat, before we used to use run levels, right? So the targets are really the replacement for your run levels. So really, the target is what it does. It defines the sections of the system services that are enabled for a particular environment, right? So we're going to talk about different targets, but just to give you an example, if we are running a graphical interface, right? The graphical interface would run a number of services, including services to hold that graphical interface. Right? If we run a multi-user target, then that has no graphical interface. It's actually just it has a basic shell, and obviously it loads a low amount of services. Obviously, if you're going to go into rescue mode or emergency mode, you really don't want a lot of the services loaded because you're trying to recover your environment. So all these 4 different targets, we have a different selection of services that would be enabled whenever that target is in use. Okay, so let's talk about the Systemctl, and let's start getting into the lab and working with the Systemctl. The first thing that we're going to do is just talk about Systemctl. As you know, this is going to be the most important tool that we use today, and I'm going to show you just a couple of directives that you can use to work with it. I believe that by now you're probably familiar with Systemctl, but let's bring the tool and start working on it. So we're going to first let's cover a couple of things at the same time. First, the Systemctl tool, which I show you already the man page for it, but then we're going to work with units, and we're just going to do some commands just to show units and things like that, right? So the first thing is, let me go here to my lab. If we run the Systemctl command by itself, what it's going to give you is a list of services or a list of units, right? The units can be devices, it can be a path, it can be a target, it can be a service, it could be, you see some units here that, these are auto mount units as well. So it will list the units, and it's going to show you the loaded state, the state, if it's active or inactive, and then it's going to give you some more information, right? So this is when you run it with nothing, this is the output that you get. So it's basically very large. It's a lot of information. We can also run it with -L, right? And -L is just it reduces the amount of jargon just to say that it adds to the output, but it just lists the units. So you can go through the entire list of unit. If you do all, so it's going to include the units that are loaded, and also the units that are not loaded, the ones that were not found, and it's going to give you some more information. So this is now if you want to narrow down your command to a specific type of units, then you need to include the type option, and on the type option then you have the different type of units that you have available, right? You have auto mount, bus names, device, mount, path, services, snapshots, targets, sockets, whatever you want to see. So if you want to see the services that you have right now, then you can run Systemctl -L and then type services, and then you will get the service name on the left, and then some more information about it. If it's if it's active, if it's running, and what's going on with that service. So this is pretty much as I would use. Let me just show you a couple of other units. Let's say that we want to see targets, right? So here the targets that we have currently on this on the environment right now. We can do again, /all is to show you all of them, right? But these are the target units, and then we have also important ones to recognize are the sockets, right? Sockets are used to create to create a socket for particular services, right? So these are the socket units that you have right now. These are you can see the ones that are listening, the ones that are running, and and the actually the state of that unit, right? We do have all the things that we could do, with Systemctl, and for particular units, you could say list dependencies in case you want to look at the dependencies of a particular unit. So let's take a look at the dependency for the multi-user. For the multi-user target, and it will give you a list of dependencies of that particular unit, right? So if as we were saying earlier, a target, has a particular subset of services that's going to load, right? So you can, you can take a look at that, but type in the, get the dependencies, and it's going to give you a kind of a tree view of what are the dependencies of the relationship between services and that particular target, right? So and here you have services. Obviously there's sockets that some services cannot start unless they have a socket. Then you have all the taggers as well, right? You see, as you can see here, there are all the targets that are loaded within the multi-user target, which is the basic target, and here you have the socket target, right? So these are not real so then you have the CSINAC target as well, and then obviously you have all the dependencies for all those units, right? You got mounts, more services. So here you get a good list of what are the dependencies for that particular unit. Okay, so now let's start working specifically with services. We're gonna get back to targets in a minute, but right now let's talk about services and see what are the directives that we can do with a service, right? For that, let's see if we can pick a service that is sorry. Let's see Cronity, right? Right, let's work with the Cronity service, right? As you can see, the first thing that I did is status. The status command is going to give you a lot of information about the service. So this is important. This is there's some characteristics here that I want to talk about that come with these are some improvements with the new systemd architecture. But let's start by taking a look at the output, right? So we have first the name of the service and a small description here, which is telling you that this is an NTP client server, right? The next line will show you the persistent state of this service. So it's telling you that it's loaded. So most probably the service is set to load every time the particular target that we're running under is running. It gives you obviously the location of the service, and we're going to hop onto this directory just take a look as well. But this is the location of the service, and then it gives you some more information, right? It's enabled, right? And it tells you the vendor preset, right? It tells you the vendor preset. It means that once we install a Red Hat for the first time, it comes enabled by default. Now this is on the active line. What you get is the current state of the service. So currently the service is active, as we can see, and then we have the some information about the process, and here we have the process ID. And what we have down here is what I'm really excited about, because there is a systemd comes with its own journal, which is your journal CDL. And whenever we look for status on a service, it gives you some information about what that service actually logging in that journal, right? Which is pretty good. So you get some good information like select source here. You see that the service tried to pick up some sources for time, and this is very good for troubleshooting, right? Let's look at another output for another service. So let's try to start as SSHD, right? Okay, let's see if I have HTTP. No? Okay. Pick another service. Right, let me try something like the network manager, right? Or forward D, right? Let's say forward D. Right? So if you can see, when you run Systemctl status and then forward D, one of the things that the output of your journal, it gets truncated down here, right? So it doesn't give you all the information that you need. So the way to fix that is by running it with the -L, and it will give you the entire output of your journal. And this is very good to troubleshoot. If the service fails for whatever reason, well, you'll be able to see it there, which is very important. All right, so let's keep working with the cronid service. Let me clear the screen a little bit, and let's run some functions. So first, one thing that we want to do, as you can see, the service is running. So Systemctl, let's just make sure that's the case. See status, and then we're gonna do cronid. It's running. So one thing that we might want to do is stop it, right? So the way to do that is by doing Systemctl stop, right? The cronid service. All right, stop cronid, and if we look at the status now, obviously it will show different, right? So this is the persistent value for the service. Is set to enable, right? But it's inactive, so it's dead. That means, you know, that we went ahead and we stopped it. All right, so obviously to start it back up is the option is pretty clear, which is start. Right? Run status and service back up again. All right. We could, you know, if we do some configuration, we might want to restart the service, and the directive is again restart, right? cronid, and obviously you will get the service with, you know, cycle, and as you can see here, the PID for the service was 2746, and the PID is changed, right, to 2779. That means the service, you know, the process was completely killed, and then the service was restarted, and a new process, you know, started for that particular service. But sometimes that's not desirable, right? So maybe, you know, you are at a point where you really want your service to just reload its configuration without interrupting service, right? I mean, you know, in rare cases, but if you're running like something like web server and you do a minor change, you might just want to, you know, load that particular configuration. The way to do that, instead of restarting your service, is to reload, right? Okay, so it says that reload is not applicable for cronid. So let's try another service. Let's try forward D, right? Okay, so but let's look at it, you know, quickly. If we do status, right, you will see that the PID for forward D is 808. If we do a reload forward D, right, let me just highlight it here so you can see it. If we do reload forward D, what happened is you still get the same process ID, which is 808. If you restart, obviously you interrupt the service, and then you bring it back again, and it will come, you know, back out with a different PID, right? Okay, so let's clear the screen. Something else that we want to do, we were talking about the persistent state of the service, right? The persistent state of the service, what that means is what's going to happen when the service start next, right? So in the particular case of cronid, Systemctl status D. We said that the persistent state for the service right here is set to enable, right? And the vendor preset is enable. But you know, how can we make sure that this service doesn't start next time I reboot? Because I might want to say, you know what, I want to stop cronid because it conflicts with something, right? And then I want to make sure, right, even though it stopped, I just don't want the service to come back up, right? Right now it's enabled, so it's obviously it's going to come back up. The way to do that is by saying disable, right? And what it does, it removes, right, the link between this, you know, the link that it created for cronid.services on the multi-user.target once, right, folder, which is the directory that has all the dependencies for the target that we're running right now. So if you look at the cronid now, if you look at the status, then you will see that it stopped, but it's also set to disable. So next time we reboot, it's not gonna start. You know, the fact that it's disabled doesn't mean that it won't start, right? We might have a service that's disabled and it could start. So let's just Systemctl start cronid, and you know the service is running, but it's just disabled. So next time, you know, and this is where there's some confusion might arise, right? Because if we install something like a web service, and then, you know, and let's just do that right now, right? Jump install HTTPD. Let's let it run, you know, as we talk, right? So if we install a web service, and you know, we take the default settings, the preset settings, you know, set by the vendor, right? So if we might go ahead and start the service because we need it, we configure the web server, and then we just go along and then we forget about the server. So what's going to happen is that if there's a reboot or something like that, the server, you know, the service is going to just it's not going to come back up. So we're not going to have a service really, right? So, you know, I want to give you a heads up on this because we're going to work with web services a lot later. Okay, so we say Systemctl status HTTPD. You will see that service is stopped and it's disabled, right? So even if we start it, still disabled. So next time we boot, it won't come back up. So we need to remember to enable the service if we wanted to. Enable. To come back up in next reboot. So let's take a look at the status. Now we are sure, so please pay attention to the persistent state of the service. Is it gonna come back up in next reboot? This is important, right? For real life and for the exam. Okay, so that is about working with services. Let's talk about the less important options that we spoke about. Obviously, the Systemctl is also used on scripting, like you know most of the tools that you have on Linux. So I just wanted to show you two options, which is enable cronid. That'll just give you cronid is disabled, right? And then is the other one is active. It is active. So that means that cronid right now is active, but is disabled. So let's just go ahead and take a look at the output. The reason why I say that these are not that important, I mean, they serve a purpose, right? But you have all the information right here in the status command, right? So if you work on your server, you might want to take a better look at what's really going on. So obviously it's showing here that it's disabled. Next time the server reboots, my chronic disk service is not going to start. So I'm going to do enable here, right? For those of you who are used to the old init, you know, the Red Hat versions that use init, etc init.d, and then it has some services here. So let's say, by the way, you know, just to, you know, for compatibility sakes, the system keeps some of the legacy services here still on the init scripts. So and then you had an option here which was check config, right? Check config. So this enable is, you know, kind of the equivalent of the check config, just to make sure that the service is going to come back up automatically at next reboot. Okay. Right. So we spoke already about Systemctl. We work with units. We did some directed with the services. We talk about the less important commands, but that you might want to use them while scripting or whatnot. Let's work with targets, right? For targets, you have 3 important commands that you want to remember. The first one is Systemctl get default. Get default is going to show you the default target that you have on this system. Obviously, let me show you. Let me see if I have the console for the server here. Yeah, I have the console here. So if this is the console for the server. So as you can see, I'm using the system with no graphical interface. So that's why, you know, my default target is multi-user target, right? Obviously, you might want to change that to the graphical interface. So what you can do, you can say system. You can use the command Systemctl set default, and then we put the target that we want as default. In this case, graphical.target, what's going to do is going to remove the link to the default target and recreate a new symbolic link for your graphical.target into the etc systemd system, and then the default target, which is the one that's going to use on next reboot. Obviously, if you look at it here, the system is still running you know, on a multi-user target, meaning either for me to actually get the graphical interface, now what I have to do is either reboot, and you know, if I reboot, I will get the graphical interface, or I can use system, and I'm going to jump into the console so you can see it actually the graphical coming back, ctl, and then use the command isolate, right? Isolate, and then, you know, graphical.target. Once you do that, your graphic interface is going to come back up, and then you can log in and use the full graphics. Okay, so let's talk about, you know, and this is, and by the way, this is what happens when you are, you know, this is how you play around with, you know, targets, but you don't have really that many. Let me just set default here. You don't really have that many important targets here, but let me just show you the list of targets that we have, right? So the ones that we will use the most, right, will be, let's go, you know, in, obviously we have the default target, which is basically a symbolic link, but the important ones really are the emergency target, which we're going to use, you know, obviously when there's an emergency. We have the, let me look for the multi-user, which is the server with no graphical interface. I'm surprised I didn't see the graphical. The graphical target, sorry, I missed that one. The graphical target, which is the graphical interface, as we saw, and then we need to look for the rescue target, right? The rescue target is going to be the one, also an important one to use, right? So let's talk about those. First, let me let me revert back my changes back. I have my graphic interface running here, so let me just go ahead and reverse those changes. Sorry, it's very small here. Let me just do it from here. Okay. Systemctl. Set default. Then let's isolate. Okay, so this should be back to the graphic, this should have dropped the graphical interface. All right. Okay, so let's talk about, rescue and emergency targets. Obviously, you can from here isolate into the rescue target or the emergency target. And if you have an emergency, obviously you want to, the system is halting and whatnot. So you might want to isolate, emergency don't target. Obviously, it's gonna take a little while because it has to drop a ton of stuff. But your system would go back to the emergency target. Obviously, I lost connectivity because I was by SSH here, but it's gonna be go back to emergency target, and you can enter your root password and you can troubleshoot. Obviously, so let's just go back. Isolate. Okay. All right, so we're back to multi-user. So probably have to reconnect. No, I was there. Okay, that's good. So obviously you can switch from here into emergency and rescue target in case you have to troubleshoot. But I also wanted to show you a couple of things. There's some cases where your system will automatically take you there, right? So for example, like when you have some issues and the system cannot boot properly. Let's say that we make a mistake. A typical mistake that I've seen is the, mistakes on the FS tab, right? So I'm just gonna make, I'm gonna, create a problem here on this, on the FS tab. For example, I'm just gonna, let's say that the label for this drive here, I misspelled it, and instead of data, I put data, and I did it wrong, right? So the label is called data wrong. So let me just save that to the FS tab, and if I say BLKID, you will see that I don't have anything with that label. The proper label for that drive is really data, right? So obviously that I made a mistake there. So I'm gonna hop into the console just to show you what happens if I reboot, right? So let me just log in and then password, and then I'm going to reboot the system. And by the way, the rest of the video we're probably going to work from here from the console, because for the password recovery, and we're gonna have to reboot and interrupt the boot process. And I'm gonna show you also how to default to to a particular target as a one-time thing, because you just need to do it that time. So there's no point in going back to I was connected by SSH before, so we can continue from here. So you can see, and it's taking a bit of a time, but it says start job, it's running for dev disk, and then you look at the, it's looking for label data run device, which doesn't exist, right? So that's taking a little while just to figure out what to do. So eventually the boot process is going to fail. Right? It's going to fail. It's going to default to the emergency target. As you can see, it takes us straight into emergency mode, right? Which is what we wanted to show you. So let's just enter the password and fix the problem. Obviously, we know that the problem is with the FS tab. So let's fix that and change the correct label here. That should do it. All right. So now instead of continuing with the boot process, let's just reboot and let's interrupt the boot process. And the way to do that, as you already know, is here we press E and then we change some of the parameters here. So on the parameters for us to pass it on as we boot, we're gonna add them on this Linux 16 line. So the line that starts with Linux 16, at the end of the line, right here is where we're gonna enter those parameters. So to specify a specific target, the way to do it is by using the systemd.unit option equals, and then you specify the target. So let's say rescue.target. Okay. Sorry, there's a typo there. Rescue.target. Okay, and then you press Ctrl X, and it will obviously take you to. We continue with the boot process, and you will go to the desired target. All right, so we are on the rescue target, which is basically emergency mode, right? So let's go and do enter the password. We could press Ctrl D to continue with the boot process into the default target, but this I just wanted to show you how to go into a specific target one time, right? That doesn't mean that that's a persistent state or that's the default target, right? That only means that you will do it one time because you want to get into it, maybe because you want to troubleshoot. Okay, so we spoke already about working with targets and the systemd unit, which is what we just went through. So let's go through the password recovery process. So for the password recovery process, we're going to do something similar, right? So as you can see on rescue target and emergency target, in both cases we had to enter the root password. So which means that that means that these are not really the right targets to do a password recovery. So we are going to. What we're going to do, we will interrupt the boot process, and we do that exactly from the same line, right? Linux 16, and then we interrupt the boot process right here, and we use rd.break, right? rd.break, what it's going to do is just, it's just not going to go very far on the boot process, right? If we press Ctrl X, the system is going to interrupt the boot process, and here there's a couple of things. Let me just do ls just to show you something. The system drive is really mounted as sysroot, and the problem is that at this point is mounted as read only. So the first step is to remount as the sysroot as read write. So we say mount -o for option, and then we say read write. Remount, and then comma read write sysroot. Okay, so now the sysroot folder we should be able to write to it. So the next thing is that since our root is not really sysroot, so we need to root to that directory to change. It's basically going to change the root to sysroot, right? So let's change the root to sysroot. So now what happened is that we have the etc shadow file on the right place, right? So it's important that when we change the password, we have access to that etc shadow file so we can update the password. So at this point we can change the password, no problem. So psswd, and then we enter a new password. Let's say Red Hat as a new password. Red Hat. Okay, so it complains about the password. It tells you it's a bad password, so as we know. But now we have a problem, right? So at this point, SE-Linux hasn't loaded yet. And if in this server, I have SE-Linux on enforcing mode. So since I did a change to the etc shadow file, the security context is really gonna change. So next time I reboot, I'm not gonna be able to log in. So it's important to fix that. There's two ways to fix that, and on the Linux documentation, it tells you to write a file, using the touch, and then write a file called auto relabel. And you certainly welcome to do that. What it's going to do is when the system boots and it sees that file, it's just going to relabel the entire file system. In real life, I personally don't see this very practical, since I just need to change one file, right? So what I do, I use the command load policy -i. With load policy -i, now I have SE-Linux running. So let's take a look at etc shadow, right? And as you can see, the file is unlabeled, right? So next time we start, the system won't let me use it to find the root password. So we use restore con like we use normally for SE-Linux. So etc, and then we use shadow, and that's it. So we can the label is back to shadow_t, which is what we want. And at this point, we can exit and then exit. We should be we can resume the boot process, and we should be able to use the new password, right? Okay, root. I enter the old password, which was password, obviously login incorrect, so root and then Red Hat as the password, and the password was changed successfully. All right, so that's the password recovery process. The next step would be to do a little laugh by yourself. So just go in and complete these tasks that I'm including here. So first, set the default target to the graphical target, and then make sure that no user can enable the IP tables services, and then verify the Cronid service is started, and it will start the next time, and then just have fun with your lab, right? So let me take care of that second step there, because I didn't show you how to stop anyone from enabling a service. For that we use mask, right? So Systemctl mask IP tables, right? Since I'm running firewall D, I want to make sure that if a system administrator comes back in, he's not able to re-enable IP tables, right? So right now it's mask, right? So it's if you see loaded mask, and it's going to the dev null. So if system administrator come in and say, let me start it, right? It won't start, right? Because the unit is masked. Obviously, if you want to change that and allow somebody to run it, then you just run unmask, right? Okay, so that's it. I hope it was informative, and see you in the next video.